Well, I've missed this. Will, I sure hope you've checked the cables lately. Well, good morning. For those who don't know me, I'm Jim Richardson, and I used to work here. It was my honor and privilege to be your rector from 2008 to 2015. And I understand a few things have happened around here since we left. Lori and I have held you in our prayers as you searched for a new rector, and we held you in our prayers and our worries when you endured the invasion of white supremacists right outside these doors. Thank you for your courage in the face of hate and violence. You inspired us, and you inspired the entire Episcopal Church and the world. And I hope you know that. Lori and I really are delighted to be back among you this morning. This is our first time returning to Charlottesville, really to the East Coast, since moving back to California. And I want to thank Will for inviting us. It is truly a gracious and graceful invitation to allow me to come back to be in your pulpit. Will mentioned this morning that after we're finished, we should go outside and space out. Well, I'm from California. We space out a lot. So I know how to do that. Please keep Will and his family in your prayers and show him your support. This is, I can tell you, this is a very hard job. It is harder than probably most of you realize. So please keep Will and his clergy and everyone who works here in your prayers. Well, this morning I bring you greetings from the 80th General Convention of the Episcopal Church, which just concluded its 4-day meeting in Baltimore. And for those who are unfamiliar with General Convention, it is the highest governing body in our church. It's really a legislative body. General Convention meets only every 3 years, and because of COVID, the meeting was delayed an extra year, so it has not met in 4 years. I was one of the representatives of the Diocese of Northern California, which is my home diocese, where I was ordained to the priesthood 21 years ago. It's hard to believe. I retired in 2020 as the dean of the cathedral in Sacramento. It was really full circle for us, and just a great privilege to get to do that. General Convention is a bicameral legislature with a House of Bishops comprised of our respective diocesan bishops, and the House of Deputies, as it is called, comprised of 4 clergy and 4 lay representatives from each diocese, plus 1 alternate from each order. So 10 representatives from each diocese. The House of Deputies is a huge house. There were more than 700, well, there were exactly 799 deputies at this convention and 100 bishops representing 106 dioceses in the Episcopal Church, including those overseas. And by the way, they are called deputies, not delegates, as you would expect. Being Episcopalians, we of course have to have our own lingo, all our own. Well, as I listened to the gospel lesson today, it occurred to me that General Convention is a gathering of the Marthas, the people who do the details in the kitchen. In other words, it is a convention of church wonks, people who like to go to committee meetings, who like to read position papers, who find great pleasure in the legislative process. guilty as charged. This was my 5th General Convention. My first was 25 years ago in Philadelphia. I mention all this because so much has changed in our church since then. We have come a very long way in a very short period of time, and particularly in our understanding of who are God's beloved people. Who are God's beloved people? That would be everyone. And thinking back to my first convention in Philadelphia in 1997, that first convention was not just rancorous, it was ugly. One homophobic deputation sprinkled salt around another deputation because there were gay people in that deputation. They thought that was some kind of an exorcism. That's how ugly this used to be. And we continued arguing for the next 2 decades about gender and sexuality and marriage and all of that was involved. And we made progress 1 inch at a time, as my friend Susan Russell from Pasadena puts it. This congregation, St. Paul's Memorial Church, was in the forefront of inclusion every inch of the way. And for that, I am eternally grateful. My proudest moment as your rector was when we blessed the marriage of Deborah Healy and Margaret Mormon right here in front of this altar in 2012. What an amazing moment for them. What an amazing moment for us. What an amazing moment for the Episcopal Church and the world. We were the first Episcopal Church in Central Virginia granted permission at long last by our diocesan bishop at the time to hold this ceremony, and only the second in this diocese. A church in Northern Virginia beat us out by 1 week. Deborah and Margaret, you should have moved it up a little. Our entire congregation was invited, and word traveled throughout this community. And this church was packed with more than 400 people, and many of you were here that day. You remember. And the moment that still chokes me up is when I invited other clergy who were present to join me in the blessing of Deborah and Margaret. And these clergy came up, and not just Episcopalians, but Presbyterians and Lutherans and Methodists, clergy whose denominations still had not granted, and many still haven't, permission to hold a ceremony such as ours. Afterwards, Margaret and Deborah signed one of their beautiful programs for me. I framed it, and it's still on my wall. Well, since then, marriage equality has become the norm in the Episcopal Church, everywhere. But my friends, we are not done yet. At this most recent General Convention, we wrestled with major issues confronting us as a church around who we include and who we fail to include. We approved a series of proposals involving the complicated, knotty issues of racial justice and reconciliation. And this is a conversation that I know you are involved in. It's a conversation all of us need to be involved in on many, many levels. I managed to get myself involved in one little corner of this at General Convention. The Episcopal Church Calendar of Saints, and we have one, commonly known as Lesser Feasts and Fasts, has more than 300 individuals on it. and they are mostly white, male European bishops and monks. And only a dozen of these 300, if that, are Black Americans. Martin Luther King Jr. is on the calendar, but precious few others are. I wrote a resolution sponsored by my diocese to add to the church calendar Howard Thurman, who died in 1981. If you're not familiar with him, I pray that you will. He wrote a book called Jesus and the Disinherited, which Martin Luther King carried with him everywhere in his suitcase. And Thurman set the theological foundations for the nonviolent movement of the civil rights movement. And he mentored many, many, many more prominent people in the civil rights movement. In recent years, he's had a flowering of interest in his work. In the Episcopal Church, Thurman's book has been used in our Education for Ministry program, for our Sacred Ground program, which delves into the issues of race, which is, I recommend, although it's a very hard experience. And so General Convention approved our resolution, and it sent it to a commission to develop prayers and appropriate biblical lessons. And when this gets final approval at a future General Convention, Howard Thurman's feast day will be April 10th. But we still have a ways to go. Another who ought to be on the calendar, but isn't, is Ida B. Wells, a courageous Black newspaper editor and suffragette who died in 1931. She was a founder of the NAACP, and her faith was foundational to her work. Ida Wells' birthday is July 16th, yesterday, but she is not on the calendar for our church. The committee assigned to making recommendations for the calendar ruled against including her. The reason: they could find no local church celebrations of her life. And that underlines a central contradiction in how we add people to our church calendar. How can a predominantly white church, such as ours, know of such commemorations unless they are on the calendar? The reason, my friends, I dwell on the calendar is the calendar matters because stories matter. How we tell our stories matters. Our stories shape us as individuals, and they shape us as the people of God. And each of us has a story to tell. One of the joys of my time with you was hearing your stories and how your stories shape you. We have inherited legacies from our ancestors that are sometimes inspiring and sometimes ugly, and often a mix of both. We need to tell these stories to each other, honor these stories, learn from these stories, look at how they shape us. As some of you may know, I have a book coming out in the fall about my ancestors. Sorry, here comes the book plug. I have a book coming out about my ancestors who used their house in Illinois on the Underground Railroad in the years before the Civil War. And then later in the Civil War, my great-great-grandfather, a Methodist minister, George Richardson, volunteered as the white chaplain to a Black Union regiment in Memphis. He saw a great deal of bloodshed. And after the war, he and his family founded a Black college in Austin, Texas, that is still there today. My book is titled The Abolitionist Journal, a reference to how George Richardson wrote everything down in a journal that was passed down through the generations until it came to me. And I am blessed that he did write his story down so that we know it. You played a huge role in the writing of this book. I am so very grateful. You gave me a sabbatical in 2013 so I could begin writing this book that had been just gnawing at me for a decade. But it took retiring in 2020 to get it finished and find a publisher. And it is coming out in September, and you can find it on Amazon. So thank you for indulging me in the book plug. The publisher will thank me too. Thank you too. The stories we share here together as a church shaped me in profound ways more than you know. And I still think and reflect about our time together and some of the things we went through. Truthfully, you were my teachers in the 7 years I was rector. And truthfully, it was the hardest moments that taught me the most. The hardest moment, I think, in our time came with the disappearance of Hannah Graham, a University of Virginia student who was abducted and murdered while walking home from a party. And as some of you remember, Hannah Graham's loss just rocked this community to its core. And when her fate was still unknown, the university community held a candlelight vigil just a few yards right over there one night. And all of us went. And when it was over, I was walking back here with Pastor Heather Warren, and we looked at each other, and in a glance, we knew exactly what we needed to do right then and there. We needed to open the doors. So we opened those doors. And we opened the doors so that people could come inside to sit, to pray, to weep, to just be somewhere. So we opened the doors that night, and we kept the doors open all night. And then we kept the doors open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for the next 6 months. And it is a testament to your compassion, in your faith, in how Christ Jesus surrounds us with love and grace and holiness, especially in our lowest moments. Those open doors were a testament to you and your faith. I took this lesson with me when I left here in 2015 to be the priest in charge of the Episcopal Church of the Incarnation in Santa Rosa, a parish north of San Francisco in the Sonoma wine country region. In 2017, we endured what was then the largest and most devastating wildfire in California history. There have been even larger fires since then. But as our fires grew bigger and bigger, and they lasted a month, these fires destroyed entire neighborhoods and killed more than 40 people. It's still hard for me to imagine. Half of my congregation evacuated. More than a dozen of our families lost their homes, lost everything. And though thankfully none lost their life. Because of you, I knew what to do. Open the doors. Open the doors. And people came at all hours, and some slept in the church, some just needed a break. Some were firefighters just needing somewhere to be for a while. And we kept the doors open for, frankly, only a week because we had to evacuate the church eventually. The fires were getting that close. As we emerged from the devastation, the people of Santa Rosa began putting signs on lampposts and windows that read, "From the ashes we will rise. From the ashes we will rise." My friends, that's who we are. We are the people who rise from the ashes. And we've shown how to rise from the ashes here at St. Paul's for more than a century. And you showed the world how to rise from the ashes 5 years ago, and you are still showing how to rise from the ashes. Some of you were here in 2010 when we celebrated the centennial of this parish. We were graced to have presiding Bishop Catherine Jeffords Shorey with us for 3 days to celebrate with us. And she preached from this pulpit on our Centennial Sunday, telling us, "May your words and deeds be bold." You've made those words real. You are bold by building this parish as a beacon of hope and courage in this very hurting and fearful world. Never let that go. And so, my dear friends, from the depths of my soul, thank you for inspiring me, supporting me, teaching me, forgiving me. Thank you, thank you. Amen.